Hello and welcome to another edition of Camp Chapters. I hope that you all are well, and let's finish this book, The Secret Life of Amanda K. Woods, Chapter 36, The Last Dance. Amanda was helping with Margaret's goodbye party. In the end, there were only 19 people, including Margaret. Roger Moss wasn't coming at all. Amanda wanted to know why. Because he's not coming to the train because that's for family, so he's not going to the party either, Margaret said. But it's for the best, she explained. If he wants to be like that, he can just be like that. It's up to him. It's not my fault he doesn't understand anything. I'm not mad. He's the one that's mad. So the party was just Margaret's and Roger's friends from Margaret's graduating class, but not Roger. Amanda and Margaret's mother and father greeted everybody as they arrived and shook their hands, but they stayed upstairs while Margaret and her friends had their party on the beach. Some of the people at the party knew Roger and Margaret had broken up, and some of them didn't. The ones that didn't asked, "Where's Roger?" And then others said, "Shush," which Margaret either didn't hear or pretended not to hear. The party was a hot dog and marshmallow roast with a fire down by the lake. Everybody was 18, so Amanda's mom and dad said since it was legal, they could have beer, as long as they didn't have more than two each. Margaret had asked Amanda to play the music for the party, so she was part of it too. After a while, the friends started laughing and talking about funny things that had happened in the 4 years that they were in high school together, and the girls fed hot dogs and marshmallows to their boyfriends and vice versa. It was a cold night, like autumn already, so nobody swam, but Amanda plugged Margaret's hi-fi record player in downstairs after everybody ate, and she played all the records Margaret had stacked up and wanted played. The tiny 45 RPM records, not much bigger than donuts, that had only hit one hit song on a side. Amanda had to watch them all the time because they were over before you knew it. And Margaret had said she didn't want any gaps in the music coming about because Amanda forgot what she was doing. Amanda spun Dance With Me Henry, Mr. Sandman, and Earth Angel. She played Autumn Leaves and Shaboom and lots more. For a little while, Margaret just watched while everybody danced and kept busy picking up paper plates. But then her best girlfriend, Sandra, told her boyfriend Mike to dance with Margaret. And after that, all the girls told their boyfriends to take a turn dancing with Margaret so she wouldn't feel alone. Margaret had on a sleeveless pink dress with a flared skirt that fanned out as she danced. She had put on a lot of powder all over her face to keep it from looking red, and she laughed a lot, but sometimes her lips, with her reddest lipstick on them, looked as if they had been cut out of her face with scissors, and her laugh sounded like tin cans falling up from on high and landing on a concrete floor. Amanda played Rock Around the Clock. It was a brand new kind of music called rock and roll. Then she chose a slow song, Cry Me a River. Gary Holmes, who was Roger's best friend, asked Margaret to dance to it. As they danced past Amanda, he heard Gary whisper to Margaret, "I'm sorry." And then Margaret hugged him very hard and started to cry. And Amanda didn't know what to do when the record stopped because that was the last one. So she started playing them all over again. Chapter 37, Like Water. The day of Margaret's departure, a letter arrived from Miss Amanda K. Woods. It was from India and had a stamp on it showing a man in a gorgeous robe riding an elephant. Vikram Savananda, the Swami Amanda had written to so long ago about Bob Bostwick, had at last responded to her question. Dear Miss Woods, I am sorry to say that my publisher has been slow in forwarding your letter, and so my response is delayed. I am glad your sister was not hurt in the car spin. Many times we have premonitions of danger that can help us to avoid harm. However, I do not think you have developed higher powers. As I said in my book, it is extremely rare that someone develops higher powers unless he or she has devoted many years to study and concentration and has developed compassion for all living beings. I doubt you have developed such compassion yet. I believe that you envy your sister. Your sister probably also envies you. Ask her and you will find out if I am right. We need not be ashamed of envy. It is natural. However, when we devote our minds to understanding ourselves and others, our envy and fears fall away. Since you wish to have higher powers, you may want to develop your compassion. How can you do this? I would advise you to be like water. Water is sensitive but calm and clear. Even if water is beaten with a stick, the stick will leave no marks. Water can be disturbed by the wind, but when the wind goes, it will return to its natural state. Water is soft, but it shapes the mountains and the earth. Water looks to the sky and is a mirror of the universe. No matter who tries to block it, water seeks the path it must follow. No one can diminish it. It is always complete, and its home is everywhere. My very best wishes, Miss Amanda K. Woods. I salute God and you. Vikram Savananda. Amanda looked at Margaret, who was clearing things out of her desk and putting them into a cardboard box. The box was going into storage in the basement temporarily. Before spring, a new room for Margaret would be built onto the house, and then the things she was leaving behind would go into that. Margaret worked grimly. Ever since the party, all the closeness Amanda and Margaret had shared was gone. Margaret was back to treating Amanda like a mosquito, just like the old days. Amanda wanted to talk to Margaret about the letter from Vikram Savananda, but it didn't seem like a good time. She wanted to ask Margaret if she envied her, but it didn't seem like a good time for that either. But maybe it was the only time that the question would ever make any sense. Amanda quieted herself and tried to feel like water. She said, "Margaret, have you ever envied me?" She thought Margaret would say no and shut up. But maybe because Amanda had asked in a considering way, Margaret dropped a load of stuff into the box and sat up and actually thought about it. "Envy you?" Margaret repeated. "I don't think so." "Are you sure?" Amanda persisted. And then Margaret exploded. "I could never envy a persistent little gnat like you. You are very conceited in your opinions. You are only 12 years old, but you always think you know what's right. And you think just because an opinion is your opinion, it must be the truth. You don't know how to work at all. Everybody has always spoiled you. You think currying a horse is a big, important piece of work." "I have worked," Amanda protested. "I really do know what work is." She was thinking of the arithmetic, the endless, horrible long division problems she had conquered. But Margaret ignored what she said and just went on talking. "Not like me. I was not dumb like you," Margaret said. "I knew nobody was going to like just plain me. Mother didn't even like plain me. I worked to do well in school. I worked so many people would like me. And Mother and Daddy let you get away with everything. And everybody says you're so sweet and charming, and you never worked at anything in your life. Even Roger." She stopped and did not continue. "Roger what?" Amanda said. "Thought you were cute," Margaret said. She dropped her head, concealing it in the drawer she was emptying. "Maybe I envy your ignorance," Margaret said. Her voice sounded hollow, as if she were down at the bottom of a well. Amanda tried to stay like water, absorbing into herself what Margaret had said without its hurting. Margaret lifted her head into the drawer. "To give you credit," she said, "you are not as bad as you used to be." Then she sat on the floor with her back to Amanda, so Amanda couldn't see her face. And Amanda felt bad for her, because she knew whatever was in the papers Margaret appeared to be looking at, she was really thinking about Roger Moss. Amanda forgot the things Margaret had just said. In her heart, she felt compassion, like a sudden wound. She wanted to give something to Margaret, something for her going away, something that would be the best thing Amanda had. "Margaret," she said. Margaret looked up. "Margaret, if you want, I'll give you the 4-leaf clover, the one on the bed." Margaret looked up at the 4-leaf clover and its little bed of white wax and glared at Amanda. "That stupid thing," she said. "I wish it would fall down." Amanda clenched her fists. "It hasn't fallen down for a year, and it will never fall down." "You are stupid not to care about luck," Amanda shouted. And it was as if, for the first time, she had used the sharpness that flashed in the K in her name and in herself, and she was proud because she was finally standing up to Margaret. Then Margaret stood up, with tears running down her face, and walked quickly out of the room. The bathroom door slammed shut. Amanda looked at Swami Savananda's letter, which was a big mistake mostly because it had come at the wrong time. She knew he was right about one thing. She had envied Margaret in the long-ago past, when she went out with Bob Bostwick, and earlier than that, and much more recently too. However, at this particular moment, as she held the letter, she didn't. Amanda realized that Swami Savananda was probably a Hindu, and she wondered if it was all right for a Christian to try to be like water. Jesus hadn't tried to be like water, he had walked onto it. But also, he had been baptized in it, so he must have had some respect for it. And also, he had said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Amanda got up, went to the bathroom door, and listened. There were no sounds from inside. She knocked with her lisle leverage hand, but Margaret didn't say anything. She tried the doorknob. It was locked. "Margaret," Amanda said, "I know you aren't stupid, and I'm sorry." From the other side of the door, there was no answer. Amanda couldn't think of anything else to say. How could you learn to be like water? Amanda did not know. Chapter 38. How Trains Pull Out. With scrapes and panting and quick united lifts, her dad, her mother, and Margaret got Margaret's 2 trunks and suitcase into the back of the station wagon. Then the Woods family went out to have a late dinner at the Elks Club to celebrate Margaret's going to college. Margaret was wearing clothes their mother thought would be comfortable for sitting up all night on the train, a red plaid skirt and a white long-sleeved blouse with a cameo pin. Margaret's eyes looked bleary, and her face was almost as red as her skirt. They all had fish platters, and all they really talked about was the food, and a little bit about Beryl Chalmers from Long Island, who's going to be Margaret's roommate at Wellesley, and who for 5 years had played the harp in a regional orchestra. Amanda's father set out to give Margaret advice. "Now don't you worry about the harp," he said. "You have character and brains, and that girl will respect you." "Musical people can be friendly," Amanda said. Margaret looked as if she'd wished they'd stop talking. As if, of course, she wasn't worrying about Beryl Chalmers in the least. Amanda's dad, who usually never said anything, just kept on. "Don't worry over what all she knows about music. You don't have to tell people all you don't know. Just listen and learn. People are going to like you, Margaret. They always have." He started dabbing at his eyes with his napkin, and then he coughed and said, "Excuse me," and got up and left the table. Their mother looked around the Elks Club to see who might be watching and seemed relieved when nobody was. She turned to Margaret. "Do you know, Margaret, I just read that only 6% of all the doctors in the entire United States are women. You're going to be one of a very select group?" Margaret said nothing. "You have a great future, Margaret," her mother continued. "Even though you're going to a girls' school, you don't have to worry. There are going to be plenty of boys around you. In a month, you'll be dating men from Harvard." Then, just like her dad, Margaret got up and left the table. And despite all her years of training, she didn't even say, "Excuse me." Margaret and their dad came back after a while, sat down, and picked at their food. Then it was time to go. When they left the club, the bartender, the manager, and the waitress all congratulated Margaret and wished her the best, and for a minute, Margaret smiled and looked almost happy. Rome, Wisconsin knew and respected her. There was nobody at the train station when they got there. Amanda got Margaret's suitcase. Amanda's father on one side and her mother and Margaret on the other hauled the steamer trunks out of the back of the car and wobbled and scraped them up next to the tracks, where the train crew would get them. The waiting room was closed, so they stood outside. Sometimes the 400 train to Chicago could be late. That's what her father said. Sometimes it was even half an hour late. And he looked at his watch. Then he said he thought they all ought to stand back a ways, because the train might smoke, and there was no use breathing that. They stood about 30 feet back from the track and listened. Margaret must have been listening hardest because she was the first to hear it. A thin, fine whining sound along the rails that seemed to vibrate, thicken, and accelerate as it got closer. And then there was the wail of the whistle, and the train itself pulling up before them, with black cars and yellow engine. Seen so close, the 400 was huge. In the passenger cars, some people were asleep, and some were reading magazines, never even looking out to see what they could of Rome, Wisconsin. Back 2 cars was a dining car. Amanda could see people in it glancing out the window and talking, picking up cups of coffee and setting them down, completely unconcerned with the dark world outside. 2 trainmen jumped down and hauled the trunks and Margaret's suitcase onto a dolly and rolled everything up to the baggage car. The conductor looked out the door of the nearest passenger car and shouted, "All aboard!" "Goodbye," Margaret said. She touched her mother's arm and then her father's and started walking fast to the train without looking back. The train engine was revving up loudly and so powerfully, and steam was spitting from places between the train's great black wheels. A train was nothing like a car, Amanda thought. It was thousands of times more powerful, invincible, like time, which could never be stopped. Amanda felt as if not just Margaret, but the world itself were being ripped away from her, and she ran, catching up with Margaret, grabbing her sister's arm. "Margaret, Margaret, nothing will ever be the same," she cried. Margaret glanced at Amanda for just an instant and then jerked free. Amanda kept walking beside her all the way to the steps, hoping her sister would turn and look at her again. "Margaret, Margaret, nothing will ever be the same," she repeated, but maybe Margaret couldn't hear her over the sudden gathering roar of the train because she didn't turn. She just ran up the steps of the train and disappeared inside it. Amanda moved back and stood with her parents. In a minute, they could all see Margaret again, standing by a window in the car just forward of where they stood. And then Margaret sat and looked out at them, her hands holding the seat in front of her around the little white napkin that covered the top of it, her face not smiling, as if she were looking out from another world. The train started moving. Margaret waved once, whether to them or to all Rome, Wisconsin, Amanda didn't know. Then Margaret was out of sight, car after car following, and the light from hundreds of identical square windows flashing by and erasing the place where Margaret's face had been, until the last car passed and the train was gone. Just like that, it was over. Their father sniffed a couple of times and took out his handkerchief. Their mother's gray-blue eyes were misty and excited. To Amanda, without Margaret, her family seemed tiny, standing on the crushed cinders by the rails, staring down the track where the train had departed. "Well," said her father. They moved away from the depot toward the street. They heard bursts of singing when the door of the House of Truth Tavern opened and closed a few blocks away, but they couldn't make out the words. It was past 11, and the street was empty except for one car coming, and then, even before it pulled up, Amanda could see whose it was. It was Roger Moss's old Ford, and Roger was jumping out of it. He didn't say hello. He just ran to the track with swift steps and stood looking down at it, as they had done. He raised a hand to shade his eyes from the streetlight so he could see the distance better, but there was nothing to see anymore. Roger straightened and walked over to them. He was wearing his farm overalls, and his face looked hard and tired and set. He looked up at the street lamp beside the train platform, and the moths flickering around it. Even when he looked down and talked, it was hard to tell if he was talking to her family or to the moths. "I decided to come, but I decided too late." "When I write Margaret," Amanda's father said, "I'll tell her that you came." "Thank you, Mr. Woods," Roger said. Amanda felt a pang of jealousy. Her father was going to write to Margaret. He wrote lots of letters every day, but it was hard to think of his writing one that didn't begin, "Dear Mr. Smith, your reservation for the 23rd is hereby confirmed." When she went to college, would he write to her? Amanda's mother said, "Really, I'm surprised to see you here, Roger." She sounded very kindly but grand. Roger's face hardened still more. His hands were in loose, empty fists. And for the first time, Amanda could figure how much heavy farm work he did, because he even had muscles on his fingers. He looked at Amanda's mother. "You know something, Mrs. Woods? It's a free country." "Goodbye, Mr. Woods." "Goodbye, Amanda," he said. Then he got in his car and he drove away. When Amanda was little, a storm had knocked down... Chapter 39, saying something. When Amanda was little, a storm had knocked down the biggest and tallest tree by their house, a tree that stood at the shore of the lake. Amanda had thought of the tree, a maple, as her special friend. She had called it Old Bruley. Old Bruley had a very thick trunk and one very low branch that reached out over the water of Lost Lake. Amanda could climb up to that branch and put her arm around Old Bruley, even when she was 3 years old. She still remembered the storm and how she had cried when a bolt of lightning hit the house and the wind came up and Old Bruley fell. Afterward, men had come to pull out the stump, but Old Bruley had been there so long and had such enormous roots that it took hours for them to hack all the pieces out. And when Old Bruley was gone, hauled away in a truck, the hole was so big, Amanda thought it could be never filled. Her entire family had looked at the hole and nobody said anything, but Amanda had thought they should. There was something special you should say the day Old Bruley was gone, she thought. But whatever it was, nobody said it. Margaret's leaving left a hole like that, a jagged, empty place. Amanda wanted someone to say something, to say the right thing, but she didn't know herself what the right thing was. And, driving home, her parents didn't say a word. They got to their house, and her mother told Amanda it was time for bed. Her dad asked her mother if she wanted bourbon, scotch, or a martini. Amanda went in the bathroom and brushed her teeth. She said goodnight to her parents and went on to the bedroom, closed the door. She took off her fancy go-to-the-train clothes and put on her flannel pajamas with the little roses on them. But she didn't feel like staying in the room. She put on her slippers and padded softly out into the hall, staying out of sight to listen to what her parents would say. One of them had to say something. Something important. Amanda felt that if they didn't, she would die. She heard ice clinking in glasses, and she heard the snap of the cover of her father's cigarette lighter, and the tiny sound it made when it whirred under his thumb to make a flame. No doubt he was lighting his pipe, and probably her mother's cigarette. Amanda stood and waited. That Moss boy was extraordinarily rude, Amanda's mother said. Amanda didn't really expect her father to say anything. When her mother complained about people, he usually didn't. He just let her go on talking. I don't think so, her father said. I actually thought Roger was extraordinarily self-controlled. His voice sounded very cheerful, but tight and strained. That boy had no business coming to the station, Amanda's mother said. They had broken up. Margaret certainly didn't want him there. Her father must have shifted his feet because his chair squeaked. I'm not so sure about that, he said. And Amanda, her mother went on, just as if Amanda's father hadn't disagreed. She means well, but she has a talent for saying the wrong things at the wrong time. Nothing will ever be the same. Margaret has her whole future before her. Naturally, she didn't want to hear that. Amanda said what was on her mind, Amanda's father said. He sounded as if her saying what was on her mind was not a bad thing to do, as if it was maybe even a good thing. Amanda felt a tingle of gratitude and surprise. Amanda's mother went on as if she hadn't heard him, like a train on the track of her own thoughts. Amanda's only interested in animals, not people. That's what makes her awkward, Amanda's mother laughed gently. She can't go more than a minute and a half without thinking of some bug or fish or horse or grizzly bear. Well, now that Margaret's gone, I'll have more time for Amanda to shape her. Amanda's father cleared his throat, a strangled sound. When he spoke, Amanda didn't recognize his voice. The voice sounded hot, like the voice of someone with a fever. She thought there must be another man in the room, but she knew there couldn't be. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Amanda's father said. Children need shaping. Amanda certainly needs it, Amanda's mother said. Shaping people is one thing, Lydia, but if you go too far, it gets beyond shaping. It gets into tearing them apart. What did he mean, Amanda wondered. How could a person be torn apart? I'm sure I have no idea what you're talking about, Amanda's mother said, using her offended voice. What you did to Margaret was a terrible thing. Amanda felt her mouth open in shock, the air in the hallway dry on her tongue. Her father never criticized her mother, but now he was. Still, her mother hadn't wanted to tear Margaret apart. She had just wanted to help Margaret. It had hurt a lot, but it had been help. Amanda's mother's voice rose. I didn't do anything to Margaret. She herself recognized that Roger Moss has no place in her future. Maybe he doesn't. She's going into a big world. She's going to meet all kinds of people. Likely, in a while, they would have broken up themselves and had their own sorrow. But you didn't have to force them into it. I didn't force Margaret to do anything. She herself decided it would be better if Roger didn't come to the station. Oh, did she? Amanda's father said. His voice was low and hard and ugly. Amanda had never heard it like that. She wanted to say something, but she didn't dare make a sound. She rolled her fingers into fists, her fingernails cutting into her palms. Of course she didn't want that boy at the station. Margaret is brilliant. She's going places. I do believe she's going to be a doctor. How could I watch her go crazy about a farm boy and not go crazy myself? Some people, Lydia, would say it is not your business. Some people would not have a daughter going to Wellesley either. You spoiled something that will never be again. Roger is probably the first person Margaret has ever loved. Oh well, everybody has somebody. Everybody doesn't. Some people never do. I mean what I said. I mean, he is the first person Margaret ever loved. Amanda remembered the night her father had talked to her about looking for someone you could make one world with. That was love. Her father believed in it. How silly, Amanda's mother said. She could make you believe anything was silly, Amanda thought, just with